So, as I predicted, the Supreme Court in the United States batted down Donald Trump's tariff policy for being an executive extreme overreach and for also violating the separations of power under the United States Constitution. The Chief Justice Roberts of the Supreme Court wrote the opinion on behalf of the court, minus 3 judges who dissented. Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote a concurrent opinion, meaning she agreed, and that one of the 3 bases for Chief Justice batting down Donald Trump's use of tariff policy. She wanted to expand on the legislative history of the law. Justice Kagan, joined by Justice Sotomayor, also wrote a concurrent opinion. In their opinion, they said that the Chief Justice didn't need to have those 3 bases for batting down. The first one, the statute that Donald Trump relied on, was sufficient, but whatever. So the 3 bases that Chief Justice Roberts relied on was this doctrine called the main questions doctrine, meaning that the law where Congress gave the executive power to do trade policy, which they normally wouldn't do, did not specifically explicitly said part of that law gives them the power to issue taxes or tariffs. The International Emergency Economic Commerce Powers Act only lets the executive control imports in terms of determining policies related to imports of goods from other countries, but no mention in anywhere in the statute and in the act at all said that law included giving yielding some of their power authority to the president to also issue tariffs. The second reasoning for batting it down is just what I said, the actual explicit language. The Chief Justice said that even in war times, in the history of the United States, when you could imagine perhaps they could issue tariffs if there was a war and there's an emergency, as a national security interest, no president has ever used it. And here we are at peace, and you have a president that's using an emergency law that's only supposed to be used in emergency and peacetime for using it for negotiating trades, for trade imbalances. He said it's extreme overreach. And then finally, the Chief Justice also looked at the historic references and historic use of it. And he says it's never, ever been used. Now, Donald Trump, as you know, have been using his tariff policy to deal with geopolitical issues as a means of gaining leverage. He's used them as a negotiating tool. It's never been used that way and kind of to punish. He's also used it as retribution and punishment when a country does something he does not like. It's abuse of power. It's very, very abusive. Now, this should be the end of it. You should no longer need to do it. And Donald Trump has always abused his entire administration. This one, and he did it the first term, actually abuse old laws and emergency powers. The reason why he uses emergency powers is because if you use emergency powers, you get around having to go through the proper means. And if you follow me, I'm JJ Legal. I'm in the dockets. I follow the lawsuits involve the Trump administration and those the Trump administration filed against others, to take you beyond the headlines to let you know the extent to which the federal district court judges are indeed holding. And what I've shared with you, if you follow me, is I said that they abuse emergency laws and apply them in ways that they're not intended to. The most blatant example was when he used the Alien Enemies Act, which is a wartime law that says in war, if there is another nation that has people from that nation in the country and they're trying to take over a state, you can treat them as enemy combatant and frequently, promptly remove them from the country. And he used that to gather a bunch of Venezuelan young men, accuse them of belonging to a gang, and saying that gang was sent by Maduro. But we were not at war in Venezuela at the time, and those gangs are not necessarily sent by Maduro. They just came on their own, and they're not affiliated at all. And several different courts, including the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a very conservative court, and several federal district court judges said that Donald Trump's use of that law was not proper. And the United States Supreme Court, all 9 justices, said that the men that Donald Trump used, just violated their due process rights to remove them quickly under the law, were due the due process, to at least at minimum be given a hearing and opportunity to defend themselves against the allegations that they are gang members. We all know that something like 80% of those men had no criminal background history. And we know from their stories that a lot of them were not gang. And we also know from the Barry Weiss attempted like shuttering of the 60 Minutes episode, that the expert that 60 Minutes had said that Venezuelan gangs do not use tattoos as an indicator or marker of belonging to a gang. So the basis for which they were deciding you're a gang member was faulty anyway, and it sent those men to be tortured for 100 days. And Marco Rubio, you knew that they were going to be tortured. So Marco Rubio in the oversight hearing says, tortured, who'd be tortured? Like, when you execute, you negotiate that deal with Bukele. And so you did that. Anyway, I digress. So the point is that he's used that law, emergency, and it was not used. He's used the emergency law that would allow him to send troops, National Guards, to trigger them to go to their different states, claiming there's an emergency in Los Angeles because there were protests, which are not an emergency, and the police were able to handle them, claiming there's an emergency because of one strip of a driveway in Portland had protesters in like monkey suits and of like penguin and alligator suits around the strip of driveway, and that was an emergency. Sending troops to Chicago saying there's an emergency because someone in Texas shot an agent, so we got to send troops. And in all of those cases, Judge Ermengarde in Portland, Judge Ellis, and I think the other judge in Portland, and the Los Angeles judge all said that those are not used, and the DC as well said those are not proper use. There's not true emergencies. He abuses the emergency power. The emergency power is what Kristi Noem used to give her friend a no-bid contract claiming there's an emergency. It's never an emergency. They just lie and abuse those laws and say it's an emergency as a way of getting around the rules. They violate process all the time. Most of the time when they do things, there is this law called the Administrative Procedure Act, which says in order to change rules of policy or shift focus, you can if that's your policy agenda. But that law that was put in place since the 1950s says you have to issue a notice of rule making, a rule changing, give the public opportunity to comment, and then you take in all of the evidence that you get in, and then you make your decision based on that. If you don't go through that process, it's called arbitrary and capricious. So most of the things he's been doing, his laws he's been breaking, they've been pulled back for violating the APA because they do not follow the minimum process. Similarly, with the migrants, they've been taking people who belong here, who have legal status, either they have active asylum claims, they either have a temporary protective status, refugee status, or they're adjusting status. They're in line. They went to court. The courts gave them a work permit and gave them a line and A number. And they now technically documented. They've been taking those people, violating their rights, Fourth Amendment rights, going in their homes, arresting them, not charging them with anything. They have no criminal background, no removal hearing, and detaining them unlawfully. And several judges, I guess 330 judges in 1,600 cases, have been setting these people free. So if you get a chance, get a judge, you're going to need to be set free. Only like 30 judges said that they can hold those people, because the law, the process says that what we do is if someone's been here over 2 years, you give them a bond or some sort of alternative to detention, maybe an ankle monitor, and you let them free. The only people that's supposed to be mandatorily kept are folks who just arrived at the border, who have criminal like warrant or something, a detainer, or they have active removal orders. None of the people that they've been doing this to have any of those things. And that is how Barack Obama and Joe Biden were able to deport more people, because they caught folks at the border and they turned them back around and it counted as a deportation. But never, not Trump's first term, not Obama's term, not Biden's terms, did they go into the interior and apply border laws to people who've been here for 10, 20 years. That's why you're seeing people that are being deported who've been here 10, 20 years. They were here during Donald Trump's first term. He changed the law, and he changed the law without following the process. That's why 330 judges in 1,600 cases have not acknowledged or recognized that policy and have been letting people go and said, that's not our practice. That's not the immigration nationality practice. It's discretionary. And you can't use a discretion that way for people who are good people who are contributing $3.1 billion annually to federal, state, and income tax, $1.6 billion in business taxes. They're not doing anything. They're just like in line legally and just trying to make them illegal and then put them in these detention centers that Donald Trump, I guess, gave contracts to. They need bodies for them. And so that's why they're putting them in fair warehouses. They're buying around the country with the $75 billion that the Republicans in Congress gave them to put bodies in there for no reason, just to keep them in there and torture them. And it's like concentration camps because it's like horrible. We've seen the reports. Anyway, I digress. End of the day, that's the end of his trade policy. Hopefully that comes to an end and he stops it. And as we expected, I don't care what the dissenting folks say because they're irrelevant. Anyway, so I think this is the beginning of the end of them like reining him in. That he has to be for a cause. And that's a challenge regarding, as I predicted, I said that though they've given him wins, procedural wins, essentially each time over the summer that a district court judge would stop him and issue a stay, meaning a pause of whatever unlawful thing that he'd done to migrants or to probationary employees or revoking someone's grant or doing something unlawful. Every time he did something unlawful, illegal, the federal district court judge that gets the decision to stop him temporarily while the case continues. Imagine, cases are long, they exchange of documents, there's like depositions, there's interviews, there's all sorts of stuff, there's hearings. They can take years. For example, the LA case involving the practice of rounding up people based on their race and ethnicity and language, that case doesn't even end. The briefing schedule I saw doesn't end until next year, 2027. So that's why they had a pause on it. When the Supreme Court lifts the pause, essentially they're telling you can go ahead and deport people to third-party countries. You can continue your brutality. That's what's been the effect of it, the emergency dockets. So, but that's in substance. At no point did they really say that they can do that. They just let Donald Trump do it until the case ends. When the case ends, he can then appeal it to the Court of Appeals, and it could come back to Supreme Court when they can actually make a definitive decision on substance. However, the impact of the procedural rulings have been horrible. So I'm hoping this is an example of the Supreme Court taking notice that Donald Trump does not deserve deference. He's been abusing his power. He's been frustrating the hell out of federal district court judges. In fall 2024 and in spring 2025, and again twice already, Chief Justice Roberts says that he does not like how the executive branch abuses and does not abide by the federal district court judges. But you have this man in 97 instances in Minneapolis, several, like dozens of instances in Portland and Chicago and around the places where he have migrants, have been violating the orders, not abiding, taking people to other states when the courts say do not remove them to the states, denying them access to lawyers, and then not returning people. When the judge says releases people, they haven't been releasing. There was recently when the judge had to issue a civil contempt, was going to charge the lawyers $500 per day until they release somebody because they're just playing in these judges' faces. And so I hope the Supreme Court and this Chief Justice Roberts realizing that they're not entitled to deference. So stop deferring to this man. He's the wrong person to give deference to because he's lawless, and the brutality is on you unless you rein him in. And hopefully this is a chance for you to make right what you did wrong in giving him immunity, which he's abused the immunity of official acts. Anyway, I've seen him do things that are non-official acts of violating the law. So when he gets out of office, he can promptly be prosecuted for those things criminally because he's a crook. Anyway, JJ Legal, each one teach one. Let's talk below if you want to discuss this or in the comment section. Add that to the winning category. I'm so glad I dropped that in, predicted on that before the case came out. It was like 5 minutes to go, and I was like, let me put this on. I had posted a whole review on TikTok, but it took forever to post. So I was like, let me just do a quick little, make sure I predict it before it comes out. Right.